Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and we're going to talk about Warhammer The Old World today. You see, Warhammer The Old World is likely going to happen this year. I know some people think otherwise, but the rumours are getting louder and louder. Now, with that being said, with the return of Warhammer Fantasy, there are a few things that were a little bit of an issue in the later editions, and I kind of want to do a little video list of saying what I hope in general happens with Warhammer The Old World, mostly hoping that Games Workshop have learned from their mistakes in the past. It's been 8 years since the last edition, obviously with the end times, and yeah, there's a few things that were problematic even prior to the end times. For those of you just interested in Total War Warhammer, some of the stuff here will kind of relate to it, but not a lot of this video. But with all that being said, yeah, let's just jump right in. So we're going to talk about base sizes first. You see, we know that base sizes are changing. This has been confirmed by Games Workshop themselves. We know that the 20mm bases are now gone, replaced with the 25s. So Men-at-Arms, your State Troopers, Basic Skaven, all of that will go on 25s. And we know for a fact that the bases seem a bit larger on Cavalry, where the community, we've had a bit of a conversation on this on Discord and so on, has hypothesized that it's a 30 by 60mm base now, slight upgrade from what we've already seen. Now we know that the base sizes for the future are going to be alongside their unit details, which is great, but I really hope that once we get closer and closer to the actual release of Warhammer The Old World, that Games Workshop will provide a list and say, look, these are all the new base sizes for all the units that will be transferable. It's something that is very important for a lot of us, including myself, who have multiple armies and have started rebasing the 20s to 25s, but need to know about the cavalry stuff. We need to know about pretty much everything. There's very likely a chance that we're going to see a grand majority of bases changing. It is confirmed some bases are staying the same, and it's very easy to make an educated guess. However, yeah, we need confirmation from the powers that be. Base size is obviously very important here. And yes, I know a lot of you aren't going to actually rebase your stuff because you're going to want to use movement trays and so on, but eventually new models will come out, and that will be larger than the models that we already know. If you think a scale creep is not happening, yeah, you're a little delusional here, because Games Workshop said, yes, no scale creep, but there is going to be a scale creep. We've seen that with Warhammer 30k, we've seen that with Warhammer Age of Sigmar, we've seen that with Warhammer 40k. If it's happened to the main settings, it's going to happen to us. The next thing is rules. So we know we're going to get a bunch of rules, right? A lot of stuff is likely going to get rewritten. I hope that the armies still feel the same, right? Like a Bretonnian army still feels like a Bretonnian army and all that type of stuff. That is more or less an educated guess. Now, my main thing is, rules have always been an issue when it comes to Warhammer. There's a codex creep, an army book creep, a battle tome creep, whatever you want to call it. There's one thing that's happening right now that Games Workshop is doing for Warhammer 10th edition, and that is that all the rules will be available freely online, and then likely we'll get some codices, which makes sense. But this is like the whole index system, and it's happened for 30k too. I really hope they're considering this for Warhammer Fantasy, not just because it's going to be great to have all the rules online, but also to allow all the older fans to be able to play from the very beginning. A lot of us still have our armies, so having the rules available from the very beginning, if you don't want to play as the rumored launch box, which is going to be Tomb Kings and Bretonnians, if you don't want to play as Tomb Kings and Bretonnians, but you want to play as, say, the Empire, you want to play as the orcs and goblins, because they're actually fairly popular on the tabletop, you should be able to do so from the very start. Let the old fans relive their childhood and just go in there. As a minor note regarding rules, we know that the Bretonnians are going to have 3 sets of rules. Well, we don't know how these sets are going to work, but we know that you can have rules for dukedoms, you can have rules for crusade armies, and you can have rules for disgraced knights. These are the ones that usually end up going to the border princes. I'm hoping that this means that a lot of factions within the old army books, right, so you know, Empire, orcs and goblins, dwarves, I'm hoping that they'll be able to get this too. Mostly because that would mean that there'll be a bit of a separation and there'll be more people with different types of playstyle. Because, for example, the Empire, we're expecting multiple books. We're expecting a big book and then, like, supplements. As we know that there's a massive civil war between all the churches. Sigmar, Ulrich, Talabek, and then obviously there's the Marienburgers, which, I mean, they just want to join in and have fun and try and become emperor too, for some reason. But, yeah, there's the fact that you can have the Church of Ulrich with Ulrichian theme units. These would have their own special rules and their own playstyle to, say, for example, the Church of Sigmar, which would have its own specific Sigmarite rules and possibly a unit or two here and there, just to distinguish it from the other Imperial factions. The same thing could work for the Orcs and Goblins. Imagine, rather than going full Orcs and Goblins, you could have dedicated Night Goblin lists, or a dedicated Savage Orc list, which is something that I personally would be more interested in because I prefer Savage Orcs to the regular orcs. This would actually be very similar to going back to 6th edition. Remember in 6th edition with the Vampire Count army, you could kind of field, if you wanted to go in a certain bloodline, you could be Strigoi, you could be von Karstein, Lamian. The idea is have a little distinction, maybe a few units which are specific to certain factions, and that would be really fun to see in the future, as, again, theming is very, very important. The great thing that 6th edition was, it was very theme-heavy, unlike 8th edition, which was just remove everything. All the vampire counts were basically just vampire counts, and it kind of lost a little bit of the feel of Warhammer Fantasy. It just felt very bleh. So we've spoken about the rules, let's talk about the miniatures. Firstly, it's confirmed that we're getting a lot of the old lines coming back. It makes sense because that means that they can basically make a quick buck without having to put any design devs into new units. We know we're getting new miniatures too, but I want to talk about the old stuff. A lot of the stuff actually did age fairly well. And honestly, I completely understand Games Workshop bringing them back. There's a bunch of old miniatures that I would absolutely love. For example, Orc Boar Boys, I would love a bunch more. So I just hope it's not going to take a while. The fact of the matter is, it's likely going to get a release box. Yeah, this is again Tomb Kings and Bretonnians, or at least the rumors have been saying that. I really, really do hope that once that gets released, it won't be too long until we see the other lines too. Games Workshop had this release pattern of like every 3 months, more or less, for a big release, and that's perfectly fine, but not for a setting which is pretty much going to get all its rules, or at least we hope, at the very beginning. While Tomb Kings and Bretonnians are going to be very exciting, not everyone's going to want to play that. People are going to want to play their other armies and just kind of, well, build up upon those armies too. It's the same thing with new players too. I understand that not everyone is going to want to play Bretonnians and Tomb Kings, so having the old miniatures come back for everyone and just going a full big release would work out quite well. This would be an absolute benefit to the fan base, both old and new, and also Games Workshop, as they will generate sales. I will buy a bunch of the old miniatures, even if we get some newer stuff in the future. I very much want certain miniatures just to flesh out my armies. With regards for new units for factions already available, like for example, we've already seen some renders of Tomb King stuff and Bretonnian stuff. I really hope it's not going to take too long to be able to get that, because it's safe to assume that that's going to be stuff like, you know, Grail Knights and Questing Knights, anything that really needed an update that was metal back in the day, but then turned into Finecast, and nobody wants that, right? Nobody wants to work with Finecast, they want plastic, and we know these are plastic kits. So I hope it's not going to be too long until we get to see them. If they're already teasing them, it's because they're well ahead, but it's still something that desperately needs a little bit of fix here and there, as again, Finecast, I understand why they did it, but it doesn't work too well, and nobody wants to use metal miniatures. Plastic is the way to go. Hell, even just basic plastic updated new miniatures of older stuff is going to sell, because I'm going to want to just improve upon, say, for example, well, Bretonnian Knights would be the best one. If they've got a new and better looking cast, I'm going to want to buy a few boxes just to be able to just enjoy it, right? If, say, for example, we got an update to Plague Monks, I would buy a bunch of boxes because I love Plague Monks. I love them in 8th edition, and I will likely like them in Old World if the rules for them stay the same. You know, high toughness Skaven that can do a bunch of damage because they've got a lot of extra attacks. It's just the case that I would love to see a new upgraded version. I'm not saying rapid fire releases, but it would just be better to get it sooner rather than later, because Games Workshop gets really weird when they reveal a miniature, and it's like 2 months sometimes away from that, which is just silly. Really, really silly. I hate that for 40k, I hate that for Age of Sigmar, and it desperately needs to be fixed up. It should be reveal and then launch within 2 weeks type of thing, right? Games Workshop need to strike while the iron is hot too, especially when it comes to, well, everyone coming back. A lot of them are going to have their own armies. If they're going to try and make a lot of sales, they're going to need to provide new shiny stuff. I don't want to buy 30-year-old miniatures again. I have enough of those casts. They're literally as old as I am. I want some new shiny stuff. Speaking of which, new factions are definitely going to be the way to go to make a lot of new money. Kislev and Cafe have already been confirmed for Warhammer The Old World as a form of cross-promotion with Total War Warhammer 3. And it's very likely that we won't see them at the launch. I know a lot of you guys are actually saving up money for Kislev and Cafe. I imagine that Cafe would be later and Kislev would be first, but we wouldn't see them until down the line. This would be maybe 6 months or even more. This is an educated guess, but it's the fact that they're going to make more money in the long run if the book is good, and right now they're probably going to go with a whole index situation of all the old races like we discussed earlier, and then afterwards go, hey, you want a shiny new army, something completely new? And I think I can speak to a large majority of us when I say yes we do, but why stop there? There were loads of ideas that Games Workshop had in the past. This was stated by former staff and current staff when talking about Warhammer Fantasy. You know, it's not just Kislev and Cafe, so why not actually have the opportunity to work on that? I'm talking about Ind, Koresh, a proper book for the Vampire Coast, a proper book for Norska. This stuff is possible, obviously, only if sales actually do well. Sales generate, I really hope we do see stuff for the future because they're going to make more money out of new armies. If you give us just another Empire army, a lot of us have the old factions. Yes, some new people will buy, but I think it's going to be better overall if we see new factions in the future. I don't know what the plan is, but I really hope that they've at least considered this because, again, we're going to need to see new miniatures to sell. A big issue with Warhammer Fantasy was we weren't getting a lot of rule updates. Former Games Workshop staff can use that stupid comment saying, oh, it's just you guys weren't buying enough. And you can say that all you want, but if you're not updating the miniatures, we're not obviously going to buy now, are we? I just get very annoyed when that comment pops up every now and then because Games Workshop staff and former staff can say that all they want, but yeah, I have no incentive to buy another box of, say, Plague Monks or Clan Rats when it's literally the same box over and over. The Clan Rats admittedly look very, very good, but when it came to, say, for example, Plague Monks, yeah, man, like that box is very, very old, I believe from the 90s. Why are you going to buy that if the model looks kind of bad, right? But anyways, there might be the chance that Games Workshop are already thinking about the new factions in the future, because Ind, Koresh, all these nations are getting little lore hints every now and then through Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, which needs to be approved by Games Workshop, so clearly the factions, the races are still in their mind. We've also seen very large lore dumps for Estalia, Talia, and even Araby. It's also the case that we've seen new type of heraldry for them, so it's very possible that we might see them split up in the future as little sub-factions. It would be very, very cool, and it would definitely add in a lot more flavor to the Warhammer Fantasy universe. More factions means more sales, well, at least on my part, because I'm going to buy pretty much everything. This is the setting that I prefer the most, but more factions, again, means more sales, which means more support. Hopefully Games Workshop have learnt this by doing all those awesome upgrades to, say, for example, the Necrons and even the Orcs. The Eldar not so much because they got like a half an update, but even the Sisters of Battle, again, that generates sales. That's for all the models being updated. When it comes to new factions, I mean, we're getting a bunch of them, right? The World Eaters have just recently come out. Sure, it's not the best book because very little unique stuff, but then we've also got the Leagues of Votan, which is the return of the Squats. Again, proving that those factions are popular because a lot of sales did happen. This next section is going to be titled Gameplay. I know that might be linked to rules, but it's something that needs to be its own thing. A massive issue that Warhammer Fantasy had in the later editions was the fact that you needed multiple books. This is something that's also been an issue with the more recent Warhammer settings, you know, Warhammer 40k, Warhammer Age of Sigmar, but for Warhammer Fantasy specifically, the layout was just bad. You had special rules all over the place, you needed the Big Red Book, which is your core book anyway, but that was massive. It was like 500 plus pages. Most of it was mostly fluff. Don't get me wrong, I like the fluff, but rules were littered so many different locations that it was just a horrible thing to deal with, especially when you had to go for the army book and just go, okay, I'm on page 75, but I need to go to page 22, and then I need to get some more context from the Big Red Book on page 125. It's like, that was just a mad thing. They need to just streamline it more. They're apparently trying to do that with Warhammer 40k, which is why I'm talking about that here, because if they're doing that, they need to do it with every setting. Naturally, this should still feel like Warhammer Fantasy, because at the end of the day, that's what they're trying to do with Warhammer The Old World, but it should be a bit more streamlined to allow for newer players to get in, especially as there's totally new generations of fans that want to play this, thanks to, say, for example, the success of Total War Warhammer. So, If you make it a bit more streamlined, it's better for everyone in general, so people can actually play through it and not suffer, yeah, you know, the usual stuff, right? It wasn't so much of a problem for me because obviously I was very used to the setting, but if you're going to tournaments, if you're just dealing with this in general, you want this to go smoothly, you want to play through a game. A 2-hour plus game needs to be done in such a way that it's not feeling like it's going to be longer, right? That's the main thing here. And I feel like streamlining the rules a little bit to make sure that everything is basically in its pages without having to go 3 different books trying to find the specific page and all that type of stuff. It's just going to be a lot better for people. All right, let's talk about the price, something that Games Workshop are very keen to keep very quiet until it's time for release. Warhammer's not a cheap hobby, that's very much true. However, I really hope that the price isn't too bad. Yes, we know that this is going to be basically a Forge World title, likely also in Games Workshop proper, as they're doing with Warhammer 30k, because it makes a lot of sense, it's easier to generate sales that way, but a lot of the miniatures that are going to come back, we know there's returning lines once again, well, they were designed 20 years ago, some of them 30 years ago more than likely, unless a lot of updates are coming, but we already saw that goblins are coming back, and those are very, very old miniatures. Their heads were shown off in one of the Bretonnia images, so I'm not expecting to play a premium for something which is pretty much as old as I am. I really, really hope that Games Workshop are taking that into account. There was no design work needed for these miniatures if they're just the old cast being re-released, so they should in theory be cheaper. If not, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be very mad, myself included. It needs to be done in such a way that it's going to be accessible. Sure, the newer miniatures are likely going to be more expensive. It makes sense considering design work needed for new stuff, completely new stuff, but the older stuff needs to be, well, not cheap per se, because it's the Warhammer, and I doubt they're going to go in a very cheap price, but at least a more accessible price to allow people to buy these miniatures in nice amounts and then eventually upgrade when needed. It's just a very important thing here. If anyone from Games Workshop is listening, please do not screw the fan base over. Many of us have been waiting very patiently for 4 years, 8 years actually. We want to buy the miniatures, but not if you're going to bend us over the table, if you bring out those orc boys or the goblins, which are so old, and charge like £50 for a box, right? At least there needs to be a good ratio of miniatures if that's the case, but yeah, it's going to have to be a big ratio. Value for money is important, and considering that these miniatures are very, very old, I don't care what Games Workshop thinks, they do end up losing their value, and they won't look as good as the newer miniatures. I just really hope, really hope they're listening. And finally, support. Games Workshop need to realize that what killed Warhammer Fantasy, once again, was lack of support. I don't care what Games Workshop say, I don't care what former staff say, that was a big, big issue. It was never getting enough support. It didn't have to be on par with that of Warhammer 40k, which is their biggest IP, but Warhammer Fantasy was just not getting as much love as it deserved. They're doing better now with Age of Sigmar. I think that they're doing really, really well there. And it's likely showing a little bit better with 30k. I've not had too much time to actually check up on 30k because I've been basing and building my armies for the return of Old World. But support needs to be done. They need to support it, not just with rule updates, not just with new miniatures, but do like what they're doing actually now with 30k, and they've done with the other settings, campaign books. Give people a reason to play with maybe a few different rules here and there, right? It's just like a video game. The way you keep people playing is by providing new stuff to play. Eventually, people are going to want to try out new armies. Give some nice rules to this. Or how about a theme campaign book? Very similar to that, like of Blood of the Badlands, or if you go back to the earlier editions, you know, with the whole Sigmar's Blood thing. Just better laid out, more fun, and give reason for people to keep playing. Did you think we were done? Yeah, so did I. But one more thing as a little bonus round. Minigames. Something that 40k and Age of Sigmar does very well is the inclusion of minigames. You've got Kill Team, you've got Warcry, you've got Underworlds. Loads of really fun minigames which act as a gateway into the hobby. People who want to find out if this is for them. And even if it's people already well-versed for Warhammer, right? They want to see, is this going to be a good way for me to get into Age of Sigmar? Is this going to be a good way for me to get into 40k? And we have a minigame for Warhammer Fantasy that needs to return. Mordheim. Yes, Mordheim was a little bit different because obviously it was more of a RPG game more than anything else, a warband RPG game in a sense, but it's still something which is very much missed, very much supported by the community, and should eventually come back. This will give you reasons to buy some Old World minis, see if you like the style, get a little bit acquainted to it, obviously, you know, with the damaging style, weapon skills, to strength, and all that type of stuff. And if you're then into it, if you liked it, you're like, oh, well, maybe I want to do a full army. It's a great way to get started, and it'll give you reason to buy some miniatures from the very beginning, at least even for kit bashers, because Mordheim was really fun for kit bashing. Just go from there. I really do think that this is going to help out and allow for the player base to, you know, get started. A lot of people who are new to the setting who want to try it out. A cheap cost of entry is the best way to go. You know, it kind of works like everything else. You give them a little sample, and then eventually they're going to want to try the bigger one. It's just how it works, and I think that this is definitely going to be a move in the right direction if Games Workshop are thinking about it. We've heard rumors that Mordheim is coming back. There are actually a few rumors, but we're going to have to wait and see. And once those rumors get louder, then we'll be able to talk about it a little bit better. But with all that being said, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Let's have a little bit of a discussion. Is there anything I've missed out? Is there anything else you'd like to add into it? Let's talk, because, yeah, it's hopefully this year. And Games Workshop need to be a little bit reminded of their failures sometimes. It's not that I don't trust Games Workshop, it's more the fact that I want Old World to do well. This is the setting that I'm clearly the most interested in. I like the others, but this one's the one for me. So let's hope it does well and it gets support in the future. But yeah, have a nice day, guys. I'll see you all again very, very soon.